Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks, what's up? It's Big Paul here with Kurt Havens. We're going to talk about the science of fat burners. It's been a while since we've done one of these, Kurt. Fat burners and fat loss agents, I should clarify here, not just fat burners. It is the season for people eating like assholes and then regretting it after the new year. So we're going to get you ready for the new year and talk about all the fat loss agents that you can leverage to make yourself ripped for the summer after you made mistakes during the holidays. What a dysfunctional world we live in, Kurt, where everybody binges over the holidays and then they want to peel it off after the new year. The easier way to do it would be just to not get fat over the holidays.
Yeah, mindful eating.
And one thing I want to clarify before we dig into this too, like people ask me what's the best fat burning agent. I get guys that DM me all the time and I respond to them and this always throws them off. I say a calorie deficit.
Yeah, you can out eat any of these things. And I would, and a lot of these, none of this stuff is really advice. We're just going over.
Yeah, we're just talking about the various things, the various drugs, tools that are out there for this kind of stuff. But I always laugh. I had a guy DM me the other day. He's like, "Hey, I need to lose some belly fat. Do you think Clenbuterol would help that?" And I'm like, "A diet would." Why don't you start there first, man?
Yeah.
A diet and some cardio. So I mean, it's just like, you peel back the layer of the onion a little bit and you think about it, like how much of an increase in metabolism are you getting from using all this stuff? Maybe 10%.
That's more like DMP. Clenbuterol is probably like 3%, 4%.
Probably not even that much. So let's just use a nice even number and say it's 5%, and you have a 3,000 calorie BMR. That's 150 calories a day.
Literally,
that's like a third of a chocolate chip cookie.
Yep. Yeah, I've always used it. I've always used the analogy. It's like a can of soda. Like you basically didn't drink one soda a day from Clen.
Now, when we're talking about bodybuilders that are trying to leverage every last little bit, some of the stuff makes a difference. But I have found for me and working with my clients that just getting people down, let's say to 10 to 12% body fat, a lot of times you don't need any of this stuff. You can just do that through diet and cardio. And if you want to get shredded, there comes a point in time where you might need to leverage some of these tools.
Yeah. With the way I would typically do it with people is the people that tend to be naturally a little heavier would do better from more cardio probably, and fat burners, and guys like myself that would be leaner but would struggle more to hold on to the size. I would rather use a fat burner and less cardio. Seems to waste muscle. At least that's the theory that I run on.
Yeah, that seems to work better for me. Is if I keep my food a little bit higher, if I keep the cardio a little bit lower and put in like something like Clenbuterol, then it has a better physique outcome at the end. But if you're a big fatty,
you need some cardio.
Yeah. You need some cardio. You got a big hole you got to dig yourself out of. All right, Jim Bros, I'm going to interrupt this regularly scheduled broadcast to tell you about the new Science of HGH ebook by Kurt Havens. It is available on the Anabolic Bodybuilding website for download right now. There is a link in the video description below for the ebook if you want to pick it up. It is probably the most comprehensive ebook about performance enhancement use with HGH, over 100 pages of information with references, and it's awesome. Go check it out. All right, so let's start here with the beta-2 agonist. I'll let you dig into these.
Okay, so really what we're looking at is there's two basic receptors that we're looking at, beta-1 and beta-2. There's three beta receptors. We're looking at, for beta-2 agonists, ephedrine is basically mimicking epinephrine in the body. So it's kind of an indirect fat burner. So it's just going to raise the metabolic rate and stimulate beta oxidation through just an increase in your metabolism. When you use ephedrine, a lot of the effects are actually through reduced appetite. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Like if you've used like
it nukes my appetite.
Yeah, which I think is the most useful part of ephedrine. Ephedrine has a shorter half-life than all these other chemicals. So It can be advantageous if someone has trouble sleeping. It can be leveraged, earlier in the day, and then it's kind of out of you. It's not going to be quite as strong as the other two, and it's kind of a general beta 2 agonist. So it's going to hit, I would say it's kind of like a sledgehammer, where the next two are more like a ball peen hammer, where they're very refined in what they're doing. So clenbuterol, sorry.
Or go ahead. I generally, like if I'm doing fat loss diet for myself, I'll start off with the ephedrine. The ECY stack is where I start off with ephedrine.
Okay.
Caffeine, Yohimbine, that's kind of where I start at. But this year for my contest prep, I just pretty much only ran clenbuterol.
Okay. Yeah. So I should probably talk about that. So ephedrine is typically used with caffeine, at least, if not with aspirin or with Yohimbine, like you said. Yohimbine, I personally don't feel great on. Makes my blood pressure
do makes me
and I
sick.
feel ill. But the point of the ephedrine caffeine aspirin stack is the caffeine will liberate fatty acids into the bloodstream, so they're available to be used. And the function of the aspirin, people get this wrong. They think it's something to do with thinning of the blood. It actually prolongs the half-life of the drug, so it continues to work. So
I didn't know that.
Fat burning is like a prostaglandin response, and the body doesn't want it to keep going. So it wants to downregulate it as fast as possible because it doesn't want to lose its stored fat. It goes against nature. So the aspirin, they will actually increase the duration that the drug will work for. Now, that doesn't mean adding aspirin to other things is going to do that. It works synergistically in this stack. And
I did not know that. That's interesting.
So clenbuterol, though, is typically used alone. You can use caffeine with it, as it's not. I don't find clenbuterol to be that strong of an actual stimulant because it's really just hitting the beta 2 receptors on muscle and fat cells. It's not really doing much. I mean, it does some cardiac, but it's not really stimulating them all. Like ephedrine basically hits all of the beta 2 receptors in the body.
The ECY stack that I usually start off with will mess my sleep up, and I found that I do better with sleep when just running clenbuterol.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think when guys are in prep, when they're deep in prep, or anyone that's deep in the diet and sleep becomes disrupted, I would probably focus on getting sleep correct before I would add more chemicals. You'll lose more fat just simply by sleeping than you would by adding more drugs, right? We've all been there before a show where you're just not getting rest. The outcome is not as great as it would be if you were actually sleeping.
Yeah, and I was very conscious of that this year, and I made a change with my contest prep where I actually backed off stuff at the end so I could get better sleep. And that's why I even backed off the dose of the clenbuterol, and I was running it all in the morning. Not that it would matter because it's got a really long half-life. I think it's like 36 hours or something. But I found that when I dropped the ephedrine, caffeine, Yohimbine, kept the Tren doses low, that I slept a lot better, and I actually got better results. I was getting 7 hours of sleep towards the end of contest prep, which I never get. Usually in the past, it's like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah. But that's probably why you came in drier.
Yep.
Right. And you were leaner because you were actually sleeping.
Yep.
So clenbuterol is similar, but it's more refined, like I was saying. So it's more of like a ball peen hammer. So you're just hitting the receptors basically that you want and not all the other ones. With that being said, it doesn't seem to really affect appetite though. I don't lose my appetite on Clen. So you have to be careful because you can easily overeat while on Clen and outdo it. It's not that strong.
Yeah. And what I do to mediate that, Kurt, is when I get towards the end of prep, when I'm putting in orals, the orals tend to crush my appetite. So I'll swap out the ECY for clenbuterol at that point.
Okay.
So I've been using I don't know if my logic's flawed, but that's kind of how I've been doing it. I'll swap it out and lean more into the clenbuterol at the end of a prep.
So like if you were using, let's say like Anavar, Winstrol or something similar to that, because that's already destroying your appetite. There's no reason for the ephedrine in there at that point.
No, I pull it out then.
Okay. See, I always preferred, it's a personal preference thing. I always preferred ephedrine over clenbuterol. I felt better on it. I'd have more focus. Clenbuterol, like if I use a lot, it makes me jittery and you get weird cramps. It switches around the sodium potassium pump. So it can create a temporary hypokalemia thing that will cause weird cramping. I don't know if you've ever gotten that.
Yeah, I've had the
sometimes cramp up from Clen. There is a theory out there that taurine is supposed to fix this. That's never really been, as far as I know, it's never been proven. The problem with taurine is it's similar to L-carnitine. The body produces plenty of it. And by taking more, assuming you have healthy kidneys, you're raising the excretion rate. So if you take 5 grams, you're just going to piss out 5 grams. It doesn't actually get stored or used. So
I've noticed if you ramp up the doses, I really don't have the cramping problems with
okay.
Clenbuterol for me, but I know some people that get horrible one of my silly friends that started right off with 200 micrograms and was cramped up so bad. I'm like, yeah, that might do it. Yeah. The one side effect I get from Clenbuterol is that I have to drop my blood pressure medicine. The Clenbuterol actually lowers my blood pressure.
Yeah, because it's not having the same cardiac effects that like ephedrine or other stimulants would have.
I actually would get faint feeling, and I was checking my blood pressure. It was like 90 over 50 or something. So
yeah,
you got to pull the blood pressure medicine out.
Yeah, and most people should be checking their blood pressure anyway before they run stimulants. So ephedrine can be run longer term and seems to work almost better chronically, at least in studies. Whereas Clenbuterol, because it's so exact in its mechanism, it tends to cause the receptors to downregulate. So I just want to clarify something here. So steroid receptors, classic steroid receptors, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone receptors do not downregulate from overuse. Peptide receptors like growth hormone, insulin receptors, beta receptors, things like that tend to downregulate in the presence of too much, right? So I become insulin resistant and things like that. So Clenbuterol will cause the beta-2 receptors to not translocate to the cell surface with prolonged use. If you were to use 20 micrograms a day, it would be under that point, but 20 micrograms of Clen isn't really doing much.
No.
At least for me, wouldn't do anything. Once you're in a normal dose, right? Like the standard dose is you start at 20 or 40 and you go up by 20 micrograms every week or something. The way to mitigate that, because the old school protocol of running Clenbuterol was you would either run it every other day or 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. My issue with that is, especially if you're using it for a bodybuilding show, is then you have 2 weeks or every other day with this reduced fat burning that's occurring. So it seems not very efficient. Mm-hmm. What you can do is you can use something called Nicotine, which is a histamine agonist, which will keep the beta receptor active and at the cell surface.
Yeah, and I ran that this year after you told me that.
Oh, you did, and it works better. Then you can just stay on. So again, I'm not advocating the use of this stuff. Normally, I'm advocating continuous use, but by using something like Nicotine or even
Benadryl, right? Yeah, Benadryl.
It's just not as good as Nicotine, but Nicotine harder to get. It's a prescription drug. So that's just a strategy if you want to use Clenbuterol continuously. Albuterol is really similar to Clenbuterol. It's just got a shorter half-life. It's not doing anything really unique. Most of the albuterol you find, at least that I see, is in an inhaler. It's not. Yeah,
I just threw that in there because I know some people that run that in lieu of Clenbuterol.
Yeah, I mean, you can find it. I'm sure research companies probably make it in, tabs or whatever. So it's usually one of the two. I would not personally run ephedrine and Clenbuterol concurrently. It seems kind of redundant, and you're just going to cause the receptors to downregulate even faster. That's kind of a personal choice which one you would choose. I always personally choose ephedrine, but I know most guys probably choose Clenbuterol.
I like ephedrine. It's just it gets to a point where I can't sleep on it. So that's the issue. And I think it's not so much people think it's the ephedrine that's causing side effects in the ECY stack. It's the Yohimbine generally is what I've seen. Yohimbine can make you feel really nasty.
Yeah, I feel really ill. And I feel like the dosing too is off, right? It's not. These companies that are selling it as a supplement aren't measuring correctly. Who knows what the actual milligrams are in those pills?
Yeah, Justin has his product, the Go pills that has it, and he put a lower dose in it. I think it's 2.5 milligrams, and I've found that's pretty decent. Yeah, I think it was 2.5 milligrams and 200 milligrams of caffeine, and then you stack it with the 25 milligrams of ephedrine.
Yep,
that's what I was doing. All right, so what do we got next here? We've got alpha-2 agonists.
Okay,
Antagonists,
the opposite of the beta receptors, the alpha receptors. So basically, beta receptors are where beta oxidation occurs and where it begins. That is the process of fat burning. The alpha receptor is one of the places where fat will enter the cell. So, and you have two different words. You have agonist and antagonist. So agonist means it binds to a receptor and causes a response. Antagonist means it binds to a receptor and basically stops a response.
Blocks it, right? Yep.
So an alpha-2 antagonist is like Yohimbine, is something that sticks to the alpha receptor and basically stops fatty acids from entering the fat cell. So it's kind of doing the opposite. But you net out, you can net out still losing fat, right? Because energy balance is, or fat loss or any of these things are basically just an equation of, calories in and calories out.
Right. Thermodynamics at the end of the day.
So Yohimbine is basically just something it's helping prevent some fat, some fat storage. I think I found it useful in women almost more than men, where it kind of prevents some of their fat storage, the pattern on the legs and stuff, more so than men. Most men that I know don't love it, don't feel great on it. I personally
and out of the stuff that's in the toolbox, I found it to probably be the one that's least important. Like you don't really need it.
Nah.
I mean, it makes a marginal difference, and it's in a lot of the over-the-counter. Usually, a lot of your over-the-counter fat burners that you see are usually some form of caffeine, usually green tea extract or something like that with Yohimbine. I think it's usually a Yohimbine HCl you'll see.
Yep.
Typically, and on over-the-counter, most of the supplement comes. Even pre-workouts, I've seen it in pre-workouts.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There's been a few workouts I've seen a low dose of Yohimbine in.
I would feel like that would make your blood pressure do weird stuff.
Yeah, I just feel funky on Yohimbine. I do not like it. Yeah,
my general consumption is for it. And the other chemical you had on there is basically just a stereoisomer of Yohimbine.
Yeah,
you generally don't see it that often. I'm not even trying to pronounce it. It's related to Yohimbine. Basically, does the same thing.
Yeah, I've had people talk about, is it Rauwolscine or Rauwolscine?
Something like that. Yeah.
I've had people mention it before. I have never personally used it or run it, but I've had people ask me about it, so I just tossed it in there. So stimulants, let's talk about. This is a wild one to me, the nicotine thing. There were tons of dudes when I was at my recent bodybuilding show talking about using nicotine gum and in vapes and stuff for fat burning. That's wild to me.
Yeah, I mean, so caffeine, like I said before, caffeine is basically just caffeine's a proven effective supplement. It's not burning fat technically; it's just liberating free fatty acids into the blood. So, if you use it before exercise, you have a greater chance of burning that fat that's now liberated. Any of the fat that's liberated that's not then burned will just literally go back into adipose tissue. So there's no harm, no foul. It's just, that's all it's doing. And it gives obviously mental focus and things like that, but it would not be considered like a direct fat burner, but it's used in a lot of fat burning products. And I just think if your work output is greater, you'll probably burn more calories.
And isn't caffeine, if I recall correctly, it's technically not a stimulant, isn't it an adenosine antagonist?
Yeah, it basically blocks the chemical that makes you feel tired.
Yeah.
But it does, but it can also act, so it's catabolic hormones that are breaking things down, which technically caffeine will cause energy, right? So like growth hormone releases free fatty acids into the bloodstream. It actually gives you energy, versus IGF tends to make you tired because it's anabolic and building things up. That's kind of a simplified version, but so caffeine does give some indirect energy, but a lot of the effects are through blocking the chemicals that make you feel sleepy. Nicotine is a weird one. I've not heard of it really used as a fat burner. It has anti-estrogen properties. It's definitely an appetite suppressant.
Yeah, and I looked it up before we did this because that was a new one to me when I was at the bodybuilding show. A lot of guys talking about using nicotine, but I did look up, there's some studies that say it causes a roughly, it was pretty significant. They said they found that people that were coming off of cigarettes had I don't know if it was, or nicotine, or had roughly a 200 calorie differential in their metabolism, daily metabolism, which seems pretty significant to me. I have to dig more into it, and so don't quote me on any of this crap.
Yeah, right. I mean, it makes sense, right? It is a stimulant, so it's going to raise, blood pressure and things like that. I never thought of it as like a classic stimulant, though.
Yeah, and I would not suggest it for bodybuilding either, because isn't it a vasoconstrictor and causes all kinds of other weird shit to go on with your cardiovascular system?
Yeah, and it's addictive. I don't know why I wouldn't personally. I'm not that caffeine is mildly addictive. I personally wouldn't mess around with nicotine if you're prone to being addicted to things. No.
Phentermine is another one that I've heard mentioned recently, but it's a stimulant and also an appetite suppressant, correct? If I
Yeah,
recall correctly.
it's actually related to amphetamine. So it's
So it's
just an
meth.
altered version. Yeah, it's basically meth. I don't believe it's on the market anymore. I think it was pulled off because there were horrible side effects, right? Possibly
I
death.
think you can still get it. I think it still is on the market, but I know didn't they pull it off for a while because like people were dying from it.
Yeah,
Some crazy shit.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, some of this stuff is way out there, man. Like I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, and I guess ephedrine.
Once again, the best fat burner is a calorie deficit and some cardio.
Yeah. Yep.
And then of course ephedrine. We already talked about that, but that is a stimulant.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say so kind of a theory that I think people really have trouble wrapping their heads around too is when you talk about calories. So we said before that you're talking about a balance, right? Calories in and calories out. So, and with specific foods too, this is where people get really confused. So the process of burning fat does not mean you're going to lose fat either. So
right.
People get really confused by this. You could be in a state of ketosis and gaining weight. I know that people don't seem to understand that you could get plenty fat being in keto. You could get plenty fat being on a carnivore diet. It has nothing to do with weight loss per se if your calories are still too high. There's no magic. Correct. You cannot outdo physics. The more fat that you eat, the more fat you burn, but the more fat you store, right? The more carbohydrates you eat, the more glycogen you store, and the more glucose you burn. But you don't burn as much fat. No, what's going to determine fat loss is the calorie deficit at the end of the day, not so much the macros per se.
Correct. For bodybuilding, we would probably want for performance, and we've talked about this. We have another video up on the science of carbohydrates. I would think if you would want to maximize your performance in the gym, people get very emotional about this, that you would probably want to eat a more carbohydrate-based diet. And I know the keto and carnivore guys get very upset when I mention that. But if keto and carnivore works for you, by all means, keep doing it. I personally don't think it's the most optimal way.
Nope.
And I think science would agree with us.
Well, definitely not if you want to build muscle.
Not if you want to build muscle. I think where people get themselves twisted up in knots, and I'm a little off track on this one, I'm going to roll back again with the keto and carnivore diet. And somebody made a very good point about this, that it essentially, I think it was Lane Norton I heard say this, and it's like why you lose weight. It's because you've essentially eliminated an entire, if you're not eating carbs or processed foods, you've basically eliminated all junk foods. You're not eating potato chips. You're not eating ice cream. You're not eating cookies. You're not eating any of the high calorie. You're not eating hamburgers. You're not eating French fries. It's not that there's some magic per se in that diet. You've just created a calorie deficit.
Correct. And you see this too. Another one that's I'm probably going to get heat for, but you see it with gluten as well. So unless someone has celiac disease, which you would be very aware if you had celiac disease, it's a serious disease.
Yeah.
When people eliminate gluten from the diet, again, there's nothing harmful about gluten. It's a protein. What happens is they stop eating processed food because most processed food contains gluten. And so their inflammation goes down because they stopped eating all the crappy fat and fillers and processed junk that's in those foods, and they've eliminated these things. It's not like, oh my God, I got rid of eating bread and now all of a sudden I'm healthy. There is no link there at all.
All right, the next one, this is the big one. This is the one that everybody's talking about right now, are appetite suppressants. And you hear of semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 agonist. Phentermine was another one, but it works through different mechanism. But GLP-1 agonists are the hot drug of the day for fat loss.
Yep.
And essentially all it is, for you, I think you and I talked about it before, Kurt, but I feel like for most bodybuilders, it is unnecessary and doesn't really serve a purpose. If anything, it probably makes things worse. But it's basically self-control in a needle. If you can't control your appetite, and there are some people that have very disordered and dysfunctional hunger hormone signaling, and it may be a helpful tool there. But I feel like the most bodybuilders who are in command of their self-control and their willpower and aren't obese probably will have zero benefit from taking a GLP-1 agonist, I would think, unless you're insulin resistant or have some other shit going on.
Yeah. So I'm not, and this is my area, this is my field of study, although not directly with diabetes, but I'm not personally a huge fan of the GLP agonists. I'm going to say I think they rushed a lot of these things to the market to make money. As you can see in the stock of some of the companies that sell these products, they have horrible side effects.
Yeah, the side effects are awful.
Awful. And we only know what we see so far. We don't have any long-term data on these things. These are not drugs that have been studied for decades. They basically work by activating the GLP receptor. And there's a hormone called incretin that's secreted from the stomach after you eat that tells your brain to stop eating. It's one of the many hunger hormones, and it seems to be dysregulated in people that struggle with weight their whole life. And so it's just telling you that you're full. It also then blocks the absorption of some carbohydrates in the gut. It can cause diarrhea. It can cause bone loss. It can cause muscle loss. I think in one of the studies recently showed in women, almost half the weight that was lost was lean body mass. It wasn't fat. So then you get all this off you, and then all of a sudden now your metabolism's even worse.
Yep.
I know it's super popular, and there's probably millions of Americans using this stuff now. But like you said, it's, again, I'm going to get hate for it, but unfortunately it's some fake replacement for self-control. And if you want to be a bodybuilder or you want to actually look good, you need to work on those skills first. There is no drug that's going to give you discipline, right? That's why, like you said, I don't think any bodybuilders really using GLP agonists.
No, you don't need it. I mean, most people, I do see it in female competitors that they're using it, but I just don't see any need for it. I don't have any. I mean, at this point, I've dieted down so many times. Dieting is a skill that you develop, and that willpower that you develop. Like, it's just like, it's not even it's another day at the office for me now. Like, people are like, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I'm just used to it. I don't even think about it. And it's not like, I heard Chad Nichols say this, that I think he said Big Ramy called him up and said he was starving and he couldn't control his hunger and he felt like he was dying. And Chad told him, he's like, Ramy, you're eating 3,500 calories a day. You're not dying.
Yeah. So
it's you develop a skill to be able to push through that and just numb that. It's the same thing with pushing through a painful set at the gym of like presses or squats or whatever. It's just a skill that you develop over a period of time.
Yeah. Well, but some people never develop, but
with that said, I mean, there are some people that clearly have some disordered hunger signaling. Like there are definitely people that it seems like I'm sure you've looked at it. I've seen studies where people are just completely leptin resistant and have zero. You're fighting basically a battle with one arm tied behind your back, but it seems like that happens to people that are in severe states of metabolic disorder, insulin resistance, and obese. It's not our cohort.
No, definitely not. But it's sad, and it's definitely a real thing. And I think from literature, I mean, the heavier people get, the worse this stuff gets, right? So it just builds on itself. So you really want to avoid letting yourself really get horribly out of shape if you can. I know for some people it's easier said than done, but again, not necessarily like the audience that you and I are going for.
One you can call me crazy on this one and completely disagree with me that my feelings will not be hurt at all. But one that I have wondered why that people don't consider more for appetite suppression is metformin. And I've read quite a bit about metformin, about its effects that it has on ghrelin and leptin. It seems to suppress ghrelin and increase leptin sensitivity. I don't know. And it's a very strong appetite suppressant, has a long track record of safety. I don't know why that wouldn't be considered before a GLP-1 agonist for a first line of appetite suppression. Maybe it's because it's a generic and there's no profit in it. I don't know.
It could be. It could also be in someone who. So again, GLP agonists are really only supposed to be written for people with diabetes, and clearly they're not, right? I think this is where, and this is kind of my thought with metformin too. I don't disagree with you at all as a use for an appetite suppressant. I think my problem comes down to what's going on in modern medicine, especially telemed, is that doctors are writing prescriptions for these crazy drugs to people that don't have these diseases.
Yeah, awfully.
They're getting misused and abused by people that are not diabetic. I get calls all the time where I have clients that are clearly not diabetic that are prescribed multiple of these drugs, by doctors they've never seen in person. And that to me is odd.
Yeah, and it seems
Um,
like, from what I understand, the FDA is going to start cracking down on that stuff anyway.
yeah,
So,
but I think metformin definitely has a use. My only hesitation is in larger doses. Obviously, it's going to affect IGF-1,
yeah.
right? So if someone is using growth hormone, I'm not that concerned about it. If someone is not, it's something to consider. And we could always do a video again on life. I know Todd wanted to do one as well about what causes a longer life, like, and IGF. It was looked at backwards for years. IGF elevation in men actually increases your lifespan versus what was being told to us years ago. So a lot of doctors will prescribe metformin, telling people that it's going to cause a longer life because of the IGF reduction, and that's just not the case in the real world.
Yeah, I've heard that that's not the case anymore. Yeah, I mean, I have played around with it in the past. Of course, I don't talk a ton about it, but I'm in some state of diabetes, and I have been for a while, but I have been prescribed metformin. I use it off and on. I didn't use it this past off season, and I have used it in the past, but I am prescribed it by a doctor. So, but it's, the only thing I noticed that it definitely does bury my appetite. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference in my glucose levels, and that's likely because I don't have an insulin sensitivity issue. It's insulin production. Thermic Uncouplers. I figured we'd touch on this one real quick. I don't even know why anybody would even consider DMP.
Yeah, when DMP was first discovered in the 20s or the 30s, I mean, it caused a ton of deaths, which then caused them to outlaw it. It's an additive in paint. They were using an ammunition. Totally toxic and not worth the results. I think Vigorous Steve did a video on it once when he tried it. That's worth watching. I don't know if you saw that one.
No, I didn't.
He talks about his bed, like he had to sleep with his door open in the winter, and he was sweating, and then his bed would freeze because it was so cold outside. Not something I'd recommend to anyone. I mean, people could do what they choose. Not a road I'd go down. It can cause vision loss, just like permanent vision loss. It could kill you. It does speed your metabolism up by a larger percent than clenbuterol. And it's doing this by basically uncoupling your metabolism, which basically it just changes the way protons work inside the cell. So they bypass the electron transport chain. So it's actually changing what's going on inside inside of your cells.
I know somebody that overdid it one time, and they ended up in the hospital, and they had them in an ice bath trying to
bring the temperature down.
The fever was out of control. It's in the thing with DMP, from what I understand, the margin between a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose is so small. I mean, it's basically nothing. So I mean, I wouldn't trust any lab to make that correctly. Plus, you don't know how you're going to respond to it. It's just, to me, it's just completely unnecessary. I've never had an issue getting ripped without it.
No, and I'm not, you might know more about this than me. I don't know any pros that use DMP. Perhaps people.
No, I don't. I've never talked to anybody that uses it, or at least they don't admit it.
I would say if you're making it that far in bodybuilding, you probably don't need that.
I mean, any guy that's going to be 270, 280 in the off season at 10, 12% body fat is going to have a furnace for a metabolism anyway. They're probably going to have the opposite problem. They're going to have a hard time hanging on to muscle as they diet.
Yep.
That's what we've seen, like with guys like Roman and people like that. Anabolic agents, obviously, anabolics are going to have an effect on body composition. Tren, Anavar, HGH, all of these are going to affect things
in different ways. So I think that this is an interesting one. So so with just the anabolics, not growth hormone, you have androgen receptors on your fat cells as well. So some is mediated through a second messenger on the fat cells that'll cause cyclic amino monophosphate release, which basically just starts beta oxidation by the binding of these androgens to those receptors. What Tren is specifically doing is it is blocking the MR receptor and cortisol. So it's changing the way that your body deals with stress. So you'll get a much more profound fat loss from Tren than you would from, a similar dose of testosterone per se, because it's working through other mechanisms. Anavar, I did a video on my channel with DJ about Anavar. So Anavar is an interesting one. So there's one study that was done years ago. That's miscited often, and people talk about belly fat specifically. This is the thing that where bodybuilders get this, and they get the thyroid stuff from as well. Basically, this study was done on 40 to 60-year-old obese men with low testosterone, and they were comparing daily Anavar doses to bi-weekly testosterone enanthate injections and seeing which caused more fat loss. Well, if you know anything about anabolic steroids, if you inject Test E every other week, it's not really the most efficient way to use it. So that was the second group. So clearly the Anavar is going to be more efficient than the testosterone. So that was kind of a failure in the study itself. And the Anavar actually caused major lipid issues in the study. So by the third month, the 12th week of the study, they actually switched the Anavar group off of Anavar and put them on nandrolone decanoate. So then it was nandrolone decanoate versus testosterone to finish the study out. It's not to say that Anavar doesn't cause fat loss similar to the other anabolics. I don't think it does anything particularly unique. It seemed to have been slightly more efficient than nandrolone. But again, I don't know anyone that we use nandrolone for fat loss, right? Being a progesterone drug. So that seems like an odd comparison there. I would say if the testosterone was used correctly in the study, or anyone, testosterone should cause the same amount of fat. I would be willing to say testosterone causes the same amount of fat loss that Anavar would cause, at least in a man, right? In women, that's not always the option. But I think in women, then it gets even more misconstrued, because women will take Anavar and they'll think the scale should go down. They'll take it as a fat burner, and then the scale goes up, because Anavar is designed to actually put muscle on you. It's not designed to burn fat.
Increase nitrogen retention.
Right?
And
it's literally for burn victims.
Yeah.
Growth hormone is kind of interesting. So growth hormone does directly release free fatty acids into your bloodstream and does cause direct fat loss. And I think you and I have talked about this numerous times. I would say growth hormone is dramatic. I know a lot of guys don't really get that much out of it. I question their use. Their dosage is too low, or the quality of their growth hormone, if it's even really growth hormone. I would say if you use an adequate amount and it's legitimate, it should be pretty dramatic in its effects. It's dose dependent, but also limited by its dose. So growth hormone itself kind of gets tapped out around 2 IUs for its direct effects on fat loss. But as the dose goes up, fat loss will continue, but there is some indirect fat loss through IGF. IGF itself cannot burn fat, but IGF will block it works similar, to make it really simple, it's going to work similar to the way Yohimbine blocks fat from entering the cells. Right? I mean, you notice a bigger difference using 10 or 12 IUs of growth.
Oh, yeah.
It's totally dose dependent with fat loss. So all three of these would work, but I wouldn't call them like classic fat loss agents.
Body composition, I guess we'd say.
Totally.
Yeah. Body composition. So the two that seem to have the most dramatic effect on my body composition are Tren and HGH.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple. Winstrol also would work.
Yeah, but that's probably more to do with mineral retention, right? Yeah. Water retention.
Yeah, it's fluid. You lose, but it's a C1 protein inhibitor, so it kind of pulls water out of your skin a little bit too. Yeah.
Anavar drives me out pretty well too, but maybe not to the degree. The problem I've had with Winstrol drives me out so bad I can't lift weights.
Yeah. So Anavar technically is considered a replacement for Winstrol pharmaceutically for people. Yeah. So Winstrol is written for chronic angioedema, which is a swelling under the skin. The problem is most pharmacies don't carry Winstrol anymore. So the pharmacist can substitute it with Anavar because it works similarly, without some of the side effects too. Winstrol is pretty rough on the liver.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed too. It seems like Winstrol affects my liver worse than just about any other, or even Anadrol. It's weird.
Yeah, I would say the worst though are probably Winstrol, Superdrol, Anadrol, Halotestin. Probably the worst.
Yeah, probably the worst. And I heard you talking about this earlier on your video with Colton about pro-contest prep cycle, but estrogen modulation is an interesting one because it seems like estrogen can help fat burning, but then at the same time, like when you get towards the end and you've got some stubborn areas, the estrogen pattern fat deposits like the hips and the ass and places like that, it seems like there comes a point where you do have to pull down estrogen levels to get those off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like you said, in a normal state, like where you and I are right now, not in show prep, you'll do better with your body composition having some estrogen in there. Right. And again, it's for some reason in the current bodybuilding scene, everything is always so extreme. So everyone now wants to run their estrogen super high, which to me is counterproductive. It's not going to cause more growth after a certain point, and it's also going to be counterintuitive for fat loss. You're going to actually store more fat if your estrogen elevated. Estrogen should just be kept in a normal range for most people, and that's related to your androgen load. So that doesn't mean the range on your blood work is fine or is the place it needs to be. It really depends on how many androgens. If you have a 4,000 nanogram per deciliter testosterone level, it doesn't mean you need to be at a 29 estradiol.
Right.
But you want to keep it, it needs to be in a more moderate place. So AIs will reduce, like you said, when you get very, very lean in the last bit of fat that's hanging on you on your glutes, like you talked about, that's like a gynoid fat pattern. That's where women would tend to store fat, or on your legs. I know my legs are the last place that come in. Like my glutes will start to come in before my legs. And AI generally gets rid of that.
Yep.
So you can add that at the end. And SERMs, technically, they're working through a slightly different mechanism. They can dry you out a little bit, but they're not lowering serum estradiol in the same way. They're just, by antagonizing the estrogen beta receptor, they're going to cause some like mineral excretion. So, I mean, they both work to an extent, but they're not like first call. If I were overweight, I wouldn't be running to proper Remedex.
Yeah, I don't think this is like last 2 weeks of contest prep when you got that little bit left you got to get off, and plus burying your estrogen makes you feel like absolute dog crap. So but if someone's very heavy and their estrogen's through the roof, I mean, clearly it needs to be managed. And I don't think that's a different situation.
I don't think that I'm not against using AIs. I think there are a lot of coaches now that are super against this. They'd rather leverage other things, but depending on the situation, there's nothing wrong with them per se.
All right, Kurt, this was great stuff. I got to wrap up. Got a consultation call I got to get to, but this was great information. Folks, if you want to get a hold of Kurt for coaching, what's your coaching website, Kurt?
AtomicLifeCoaching.com.
And pick up Kurt's ebook on HGH if you want to learn everything about HGH and how it can keep you leaner. I've got a link to it in the video description below. Thank you for watching, folks.
Well, thank you.
For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.